Hey, so I wanted to make a video showing how I use the Force to control instruments in Ableton Live and play them with the pads. But on top of that, to use the Force to play other synthesizers, outboard synthesizers, and also allow me to use my keyboard, my Yamaha MODX, to alternatively play my outboard synthesizers or the VSTs in Ableton. So the idea is that you can use the Force as a kind of MIDI hub with your computer set up so that you can choose which MIDI controller you want to use for any of your gear, including your outboard synths, drum machines, etc., and your software synths, and at the same time be able to record MIDI clips into, of course, Force, but record MIDI clips into Ableton and back and forth. You can take a MIDI clip in Ableton and play it in using one of the Force sounds or using one of the sounds on your other outboard instruments. So the idea is you have a setup where the Force is a really great instrument to use and create music on, but it'll talk nicely and play nicely with the rest of your system, especially when it comes down to, putting audio onto your computer so that you can make a larger scale composition and a lot of edits and plugins and things that you might want to use there. So instead of saying, am I using the Force or am I using Ableton or some other DAW, how about use both and enjoy the benefits of both without having to always be in one or the other? So just to take a look at what I've got here, there's the Force, and then I've got my Modi X, there's the Blofeld, my laptop with Ableton, and here's an Electron Analog 4, and this is the Modi X, and then I'm using a Focusrite 8i6, which has 6 physical inputs into it. And the way that I was messing around with all kinds of configurations using the outboard, the 5-pin MIDI connections to try to have everything talk to each other. And then I was confusing how to connect that to Ableton, and also to use the Force at the same time. So that's really what I've figured out an easy way to do this. So the whole thing really comes down to taking the in-out MIDI on the on your interface and plugging that into your Force MIDI in and out here. And so that allows you to have the Force as your main MIDI controller for Ableton. The next step, though, is equally important, is to connect the USB port to a USB hub. I happen to have a four connection here, so I have 4 instruments, and what I'm connecting there is my Micro Monster synth. That's sort of a virtual analog polysynth, and then I have the Blofeld, the Electron, and the Modi X all connected via USB. They all go into the hub. So that way I can do all the MIDI stuff from all the MIDI control. What is going to be MIDI input, meaning which controller do I want to use to play something? Do I want to play the pads? Do I want to play the Modi X? And then where is that MIDI going to be sent to? Is it going to be sent into the computer to play a VST instrument? Is it going to be sent into the Blofeld to play that instrument? and so on and so forth. And with this type of setup, you have, I think, the best of both worlds. You have a great Force instrument that you can do all your drum machines and your sequences and your plugins and samples and chop samples and create music that is really quick and easy. I especially like playing the pads on the Force because of the different modes, the scale modes and the chord modes, and you can, while you're playing it, you can switch between those modes. I like to switch between chord modes and get seventh chords and suspended chords and all kinds of stuff, and it's a really creative and easy way to make music. And I can have that, but at the same time, all the audio is coming out of the Force and coming out of all of these instruments, including the Modi X and the Blofeld and the Micro Monster and the Electron Analog 4. It's all going into the interface. So the interface will the interface captures all the audio and allows me to put whatever audio I want into Ableton. Now, of course, um, one of the one of the maybe drawbacks of this setup is that I don't have audio coming into the Force at the moment. I suppose I could set it up that way, and then I can have, I can record samples and audio clips and do my chopping in the Force with incoming audio as opposed to, say, grabbing loops and samples off of the drive that I have on the Force. But that is probably something that is doable. You just have to go from the interface back into the Force and work it out that way. But I'm not doing it that way at the moment. So the way that you can choose between all these different instruments is when you go into the let's say we add a MIDI clip here, a MIDI track, sorry. So we've got MIDI 001, double tap on that, and I have MIDI coming in from all ports, which is good. That way it'll see any kind of MIDI signal coming in from the MODX. It'll actually see MIDI coming in from the Electron Analog 4 because that has a little keyboard on it as well. So if you wanted to play that, that would be fine. And then you can tell it where to send the MIDI out and on what channel to send the MIDI out. And one of the key things to keep in mind here is this MIDI monitor. So that's the one thing which I hadn't realized, that I needed to set that either to merge or to in, so that I can use the Modi X controller and get the MIDI signals from the keyboard coming in to the Force and actually hearing whatever that MIDI is doing. I want to be able to apply that MIDI to, say, the Blofeld. So at the moment, let's just say I look at the port, the outputs. There's my Blofeld. I'm just turning this knob here. There's the Electron. Now, of course, the Electron has 4 channels, so I've set that up to be on channel 1, track 2, track 3, track 4. So I have actually 4 different sort of patches on the multi-timbral Electron 4, and I could do the same on the Blofeld. Of course, that has 16. It's so many though, so at the moment I'm not running that. And then here is the output, which is just Force, which is the one that is going to the interface. And so that will be sending MIDI to the computer, and that's the one I would choose if I wanted to play a VST synth on, or any kind of instrument on, Ableton. So if I go to Ableton, over here I actually have at the moment the Korg Poly 6 setup on a MIDI channel and just the init patch. So if I play a key here, a pad, I'm hearing the VST, and I don't sense any latency. I'm sure there's a little bit of latency, but it plays fine, and it feels great to play it. What else do I have here? Then I have the Micro Monster on its own channel, and then if I keep going, I see the MODX, and that actually has 3 different ports entirely. We only use port 1, and that's the end of it. So I can play any of these instruments. Now that's not all exciting because we all have known that that's something that Akai has added, but what's really cool, so here's the Blofeld. I just have a Blofeld patch on there. Now if I come over to my keyboard, I don't hear the Blofeld, but I'd like to be able to play the Blofeld from the keys. So I go back to my MIDI configuration and I just set the MIDI monitor to either merge or in, and that will allow me to hear or to pass the MIDI to whatever that channel is set up to, which is the Blofeld. I'm also hearing the piano of the Modi X in the background. It's not the background, but it's playing simultaneously. So if I wanted to get rid of that, I could just take that master volume and turn it down. And then I would just hear the Blofeld. And that's Mist 6 patch. Another patch. Blade Runner. Of course, all of this audio that's being generated is sent into the Focusrite, which could then be captured on an audio track, which is, I think, a great way to put together music. I prefer to use audio as much as possible. Obviously, you can play it in MIDI, you can have it, time corrected in MIDI, but to capture it down on an audio track really does save you a lot of computing power. And also, when you open up the project 6 months from now, you don't have to care about what MIDI you were playing or what patches you were using or what instruments you were connected to at the time. It's just having it printed into to an audio track is really kind of a nice way to go. So I think that's it. I really just wanted to show that you can use the Force as essentially a standalone instrument plugged into your audio interface and doing all the wonderful things that the Force can do, but at the same time control your MIDI setup in such a way that you are able to also play MIDI using other controllers, but also on the computer to be able to play the pads of the Force and the keys of my keyboard and have all of that play in Ableton. And I can go the other direction. If I set up this MIDI track and I put some notes in there and I play it, I can tell Ableton to send those MIDI notes out, and those MIDI notes will come out back into the Force. And depending on how I want to set it up, I can have those MIDI notes play an instrument in the Force, or I can have it play outboard synths. And so it's a nice back and forth. And of course, this in conjunction with Ableton Link, which is a really fantastic feature, allows me to have everything synced. So if I have some kind of sequence set up in the Force and I want to play it in time with Ableton, which of course I do, and then track it as audio, record it down as audio, so have everything right, solid on the beat, I'll be using Ableton Link, and I've had a great experience with Ableton Link. So this is just one example of a setup. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways you can run this type of gear, but this was just a way that I found was really nice to be able to control everything from the Force or my keyboard and be able to play all my outboard gear and at the same time play my soft synths and at the same time record everything that I do in a very easy way, but also be able to use the great sequencing features of the Force and of course the great sequencing and audio features of Ableton all together in a relatively, I would say, compact setup that I have here. So thanks a lot for watching, and talk to you next time.